Hi everybody, I'm going to be going over my lesson. It's a science and art lesson and it connects to a student named Peter who is a preschool student, and specifically this lesson is made to be modified for a student with stuttering. So the case study I had was with the student who stutters, which is a fluency disorder related to speech and language. So I'm just going to go into the case study a little bit right now. Peter is a 4-year-old who engages in stuttering occasionally. He's sociable, playful, clever. He likes to engage in imaginative play. He's very good with fine motor skills, drawing, or acting things out, playing with costumes, props, toys. Stuttering usually consists of pauses in the middle of his words and his sentences, repeating syllables 4, 5, 6 times at a time, and prolonging sometimes his words or the certain syllables in certain words. When he feels frustrated, the stuttering can become worse when students are interrupting him or telling him to hurry up or finishing his sentences for him. That can cause him to become stressed, nervous, and frustrated, and that can make his stuttering worse. He currently receives speech services 3 times a week for 30-minute intervals with a speech and language pathologist, and his IEP goals in his classroom are as follows. Number 1, Peter will actively persist in expressively communicating despite his stuttering behaviors by finishing his sentences and using shorter words and sentences when he needs to 8 out of 10 times, or 8 out of 10 opportunities. And the second goal is Peter will demonstrate use of the same new vocabulary as his peers despite his stuttering behaviors during instructional and playtime activities. So it's known that sometimes not only stress, but not only that stress can make stuttering worse for children and adults, but also children have been known not to develop the same vocabulary skills as their peers if their stuttering is very severe. So they're very common for children who are preschoolers. They're common developmental disfluencies. That's in the text. It's in page 251. There are some examples of different kinds of disfluencies that typical preschoolers engage in when they're trying to talk. Sometimes it can look and sound like stuttering. Sometimes they're just trying to get the words out. They speak too fast. They can't get everything out in time. And bringing more attention to that can make a child anxious. It can make things worse. But of course, stuttering is more severe, and it usually starts between age 2 to 4. Sometimes it can start later. So I'm just going to, and then there's a part I just wanted to mention in page 95 regarding motor skills. Children who are concentrating on the development of a motor skill may or may not exhibit what might be considered to be normal verbal or social interaction with other children during that period. In contrast, children who are skilled in the motor skill may exhibit greater verbal fluency because of their confidence in their motor skills and lack of verbal inhibition. So there's that verbal inhibition, lack of confidence. So what I want to do is I want to build that confidence. I want to have them persist in language, and I want to have them develop that vocabulary. So this lesson is a science lesson, and it relates primarily to exploring cause and effects relationships using familiar and new materials, and using fine motor skills, using the 5 senses, and describing the results. So this specifically relates to the pasta, dyeing the pasta. So I'm actually using salt. If you take fine salt and you mix it with rubbing alcohol and food coloring, you can dye the salt different colors. So this lesson explores cause and effect relationships. Some key vocabulary are the words predict, cause, and effect. And the lesson begins with reading a story called Mouse Paint by Ellen Stoll Walsh. Bringing the students in for a whole group lesson, calling the different students to talk about what happens in the story, what happens to the mice, what happens when the colors mix together, what color did this mouse turn, getting them engaged, and then using chart paper or pictures to introduce the vocabulary. So I have a prompt here. So, for example, I would use picture prompts to help support. The cause is why it happened, and the effect is what happened after that. So putting bread in a toaster is the cause, and the effect is getting toast, or for example, eating too much at dinner and then getting a stomach ache. That's the effect. So I would call in different students, say, what would you think would happen if so and so and so? So they would practice learning the cause and learning the effect, and then using the word predict. I predict, so here's my prompt for that. I could use this. I predict that I'll get a stomach ache if I eat too much. And so here's an example of how I would use pictures to help them develop that skill. I would have a picture like this and say, what would happen next? What would be the effect of having your shoelaces untied? So at the end of that, I'll just grab all the students, have them model what I'm doing, use the alcohol, the dye, and the salt, mix that together in Ziploc bags, and maybe start with one color. And then after that, I could distribute the materials and have students work in pairs to measure, to pour, to mix, to stir, and to shake the bags. And then once that's dry, they can talk about what happened, looking at using the words cause, effect, and predict. They can talk about what happened first and what happened next. And those observations are going to be part of my formative assessments, hearing how students speak with each other. And then once that's done, once it's dried, they can even, if salt is fine enough, they can mix it with other colors, and they can talk about the causes and the effects of the changing the color and mixing colors together to get different colors. At the end, I would close it by having students come together in a whole group, and they can talk about what happened first and then what happened next and what they predicted would happen, or what happened when they mix purple salt with yellow salt or something like that. And then we can extend it by talking about other experiments that we can engage in that have to do with maybe sinking and floating objects. What would happen if I put a heavy object in a big basin of water, or if I put in this feather in a basin of water? And we could talk about that. We can continue to make those extensions. So I'm just going to talk really briefly about what I would do for Peter to help support him during this lesson. So providing opportunities for Peter to engage in conversations that are low stakes and not so nerve-wracking as speaking in front of a whole group. For example, using turn and talks with a peer would help support Peter in not being as nervous or stressed, which would make his stuttering worse. And having him persist and encouraging him, bringing a lot of positive attention to when he's answering a question in front of others and he persists despite his stuttering is really important. Some students engage in what are known as secondary behaviors when they stutter. That might mean covering their mouth. That might mean looking down. It might mean like a physical tic. So encouraging him to persist and building a classroom culture where students who stutter are met with patience, and where I'm going to be listening, being engaged in what he's saying, and supporting his expressive speech is very important because it's going to help him build confidence. And so for more information on those different kinds of secondary behaviors, the text shows more examples in page 251 and 252. I'm also going to encourage Peter to use a new vocabulary, using a lot of positive encouragement in front of other students, and pushing him to try to use different words to make sure that he's not just describing what happened first or next, but what happened as the cause and what happened as the effect. And then also using pictures as a way of supporting English language learners is also very helpful. And then I just want to show a picture of what the salt looks like when it's colored. This is Epsom salt, which is kind of grainier, but you can even use fine salt. So I think I showed all my prompts here. Feel free to let me know what you think of this lesson, anything I could do to change things, anything that I could do to modify it to make it more practical, functional. Thanks so much.